So as usual, on this day we speak on the Pasha of the week. And try to get a perspective, something pertinent for ourselves, while we're discussing the Pasha. You all know the Pasha is Pasha's Toldos. You did not cover the entire Pasha yet, maybe from last year you remember. Pasha's Toldos, centrally, is the Pasha that talks about Yitzchak Avinu. Okay, so far so good. Yitzchak, you know, was a korban. He was on the Mizbeach. Even though he was taken off the Mizbeach and replaced by a ram, a deer, this was a substitute. He was taken off so that he continued to live in this world. But he lived in this world with that sense and that quality of being a full-fledged korban. And for this reason, Yitzchak was forbidden to leave Eretz Yisrael. As you learned in this parsha, that when there was a famine in Eretz Yisrael, Abraham went down to Egypt. Yankov altogether spent many, many years outside of Eretz Yisrael. Yitzchak was never outside of Eretz Yisrael. So to start with, right from the beginning of his life, first of all, he was the first one who had the bris milah at 8 days. And then he continued on learning with Abraham. And then at age 37, he became an oiler. He became a korban. And from then on, he was thoroughly kodesh, thoroughly holy.
You said he became a kohen?
Korban.
A korban.
Right? Now, we're talking about such a holy person, and when we look in the Parsha of the week, how the Torah, what things are emphasized, what things are mentioned regarding Yitzchak. First, it mentions that Yitzchak became enormously wealthy. Wealthy, to the extent that Avimelech, the king of Plishtim, he couldn't tolerate anymore. Yitzchak overwhelmed the king of the place. Yitzchak's success was so enormous, like Rashi brings down, that when they estimated the piece of land, what it would produce, it produced 100 times as much. It was an enormous success. And what? Material success. And the Torah makes a point to tell it. It was a land, the year of famine, it wasn't such a good, it was arid land, it wasn't such a good land, and yet it produced 100 times as much as it possibly could produce. Then afterwards, a big portion of Yitzchak's activity as described in the Torah is digging of wells. Digging of wells. Because Yitzchak was ordered by Avimelech to leave Gror, to leave the land of Plishtim. And so he had to move out and he had to find water. They were digging wells. One well, another well, another well. It also mentioned that he opened up and undug wells that Avraham Avinu had opened, and then he reopened them because the Plishtim stopped them up. A whole preoccupation with digging wells. And this of a man who's an oila tamima, who's an oila, korban oila, a holy, a man of the highest, of the deepest, of being korban, holy through and through. What is this about? So the principle in this, and then we will draw some kind of a personal directive for ourselves. The principle is that Yitzchak's Aveda, Yitzchak's whole stance of how he dealt with the world, because all Aveda is to purify and illuminate the world. But there are different ways of doing that. Yitzchak's way was very unique to Yitzchak, quite different than that of Abraham. Abraham, as it says, Abraham was midas chesed. He brought light into the world. He told people the truth and tried to get them to understand and accept it. Yitzchak's way was quite a different way. Yitzchak's way was called Gevura. Gevura is a completely different approach. So we'll understand that from analyzing the principle of a well digging. What is a well? On the surface, when you want to dig a well on the surface, on the ground is completely dry, and there's no sign of any water under this ground. It's completely dry. And then you start digging, and it is resistance because it's dry land, it's very hard to dig through it. But you don't stop at that, and you continue to go further, deeper into the ground. And as you dig deeper and deeper and deeper, you reach at a certain point, you dig deep enough, reach at a certain point, water, a vein of water going under the ground. And this water is piped up, pumped up, and this becomes living water coming to be used. In other words, the principle of a well is that regardless of the fact that the land looks dry and arid completely on the surface, we know that deep down there is living water, fresh water underneath it. But to get it is not very simple. To get to that water is very hard. And if you do not have this stubbornness this gvura, this koyach, to go and dig into the ground. If you give up and you say it's too hard, I'll go look for something easy, you're never going to find that water. You'll find the water only if you keep at it and you don't give up and you continue to dig, and you know every place where you dig there is going to be water. Some places it's closer to the surface, some places it's further away. But you are going to find it, and you make it a point to break through it. What's the point? This is the important thing to understand. Why are you so stubborn? Why are you digging so deeply? Go elsewhere and find water closer to the surface. What's the point? The point is to actually show and prove that everywhere there is water, no matter how deeply concealed it is, it's important for you to show that there is water. What is the allegory? What is the implication from this? The implication from this is that in everything, even something that is as dry as a piece of land, as a rock, even there is a godly spark. Even though what you see is completely the opposite, completely dry, deeply hidden within it is a godly spark. And this godly spark is very difficult to get to. But when you get to it, you have a completely different resource. You have living water. You can make a ditch and catch rainwater. But that's not living water. That water is not fresh. That water after a while becomes stale. This is not living water. It doesn't replenish itself. Sometimes it rains, sometimes it doesn't. But if you go down to the essence, all the way to the bottom, and you hit this bottom rock and you find the water, then that never stops. That continues to flow. And it continues to flow with fresh, what we call living water, because it's constantly refreshed. It's coming from a source. This was the Avodah of Yitzchak, in contrast to the Avodah of Avraham, where Avraham would take the Arab into his home, and he would feed him, he would make him comfortable, and then he would teach him about Hashem, about God. So whatever the Arab, whatever he would accept, whatever he would learn, sometimes it would just be lip service, sometimes it would be a little more, but it was all surface deep. It wasn't something that he actually revealed in them the godly spark. He only affected them because of his affection. They felt his warmth, they felt his kindness, and feeling his kindness, that gave them a sense of godliness, a sense of encouragement. Yitzchak has a different approach. His approach was that you must work very hard on yourself and not stop at any darkness, at any obstacle, until you will find that you yourself, within the Gashmi, within the human being himself, there is a godly spark. You have to find your own godly spark. You don't have to get it from elsewhere.
How you do it?
Excuse me?
How you do it?
I'll come back to it. And the Torah is telling us that no matter how no matter how successful and blessed and wealthy Avraham Avinu was, Yitzchak was many times more successful. His wealth superseded all measurements. Again, this is a remez, this is hinting, this is giving us allegorically the teaching that wealth, that chayas that comes from breaking through the obstacles, breaking through the darkness of the Gashmis, is a much more powerful, much more meaningful chayas than that which you can do by bestowing kindness and goodness.
Why is it that though that the lesson in the Veda from Yitzchak we only can learn, like you said, allegorically, but with Avram we learn an actual lesson from his conduct itself. We learn how he was Mefarsim Elikus in the world through his acts of kindness. With Yitzchak we can only infer the fact that he dug well, so we see what we have to do with ourselves. It's a big contrast in the Veda.
Not contrast in the way it's being taught.
Yeah.
Right, because we'll come to it. I'm talking about Veda, but to answer your question directly, the whole thing of Yitzchak is in a hidden way. Everything about Yitzchak is an internal thing, and the fire comes from inside. There's nothing given from outside. This is also implied in what the Torah says. It says, Eile teles Yitzchak ben Avraham. The Toldos of Yitzchak ben Avraham. And what are the Toldos of Yitzchak ben Avraham? So Rashi says, Yanki ve'Esav ha'amurim be'Parsha. Yanki and Esav that are mentioned later on in the Parsha. In other words, even though we're talking about Toldos Yitzchak, Yitzchak's offspring. Yitzchak's offspring are Yankiv. Esav is an outsider. He didn't follow in Yitzchak's footsteps. Just like we say by Abraham, Yishmael is not considered his son. Yitzchak is considered his son, not Yishmael, even though he was his son, physically speaking. And by Yitzchak, Rashi says, Eil teles Yitzchak, it's Yankiv ve'Esav, Yankiv and Esav. That is because from the Yitzchak's perspective, the way Yitzchak saw Esav, he was able to see right through him, and he was able to see the deep, great, godly spark that is hidden in Esav. But it's so deeply hidden that to reveal it, we'll say to reveal it you need a very special effort. This is why you will learn later on that Yitzchak wanted to give the blessings to Esav, not to Yankiv. And this is something which everybody is perplexed about. How come Yitzchak didn't understand Esav? Yitzchak was such a fool. He didn't see the difference between Esav and Yankiv. Chas v'sholom. Except that Yitzchak saw the deep greatness that is concealed and contained in Esav. And by giving him the 12 barachas, he intended to reveal that greatness. However, because Yitzchak was able to see it, but in fact, this greatness and this goodness that is concealed in Esav is so deeply concealed that it could not happen by giving him the blessing. If Esav would have gotten the blessing, he would have been unredeemable, because he would have gone even further into his ways. Esau has to be dealt with and purified through Yankiv. This is why Yankiv was the right one to receive the blessings, and all these many years, the thousands of years that Yankiv is dealing with Esau, finally Yankiv will affect an Esau and also bring Esau back and be mevarer Esau. But Yitzchak, he was able to see straight into Esau's inner power, and he wanted to bring him right back, mevarer the whole thing immediately.
So you know the Yitzchak was able to see indeed more than Abraham. Also was able to affect more than Abraham.
Yeah, this whole approach was different. His approach was the approach of Gvura. Gvura means that you force your way in. Abraham did not have that thing of forcing his way in. He was kind. He bestowed blessing and kindness.
Isaac was forced in him, or even though around him. This is the question.
Well, he intended to force his way into Esau, but that wouldn't have worked. The truth is that Yitzchak primarily did it on himself, and he bestowed this thing on the Yankiv, and ultimately Yankiv is the one who took this power to bring the whole world into Kiddush. In a person like Yitzchak, who was, you asked me the question about Yitzchak, we don't see anything. Because in a person like Yitzchak, whose whole tzia is through and through, even his gashmius was a korban, you couldn't see anything external. Couldn't see anything outside. But inside, he was through and through the korban. Tell you a little story. The Rebbe Rashab, when he was a small child, the Rashab, the previous Rebbe's father, he was a little child, and this was an occasion, I think it was Simchas Torah, and there was a lot of dancing in the Beis Medrash. And the Rebbe was a child. He was all running around the beam, around all the people, with great joy. So someone stops him as he's running, and he asks him, he says, "Tell me, what is a Yid? What's a Jew?" So the Rabbi Rashab answers him, "A Jew is fire." And he runs away. Continues to run around. On his next circle around, he stops him again. He says, if a Jew is fire, so how come when I touch you I don't get burned? What's the answer?
You're also fire.
Because you're also fire.
You can't burn fire.
So he says, you're also fire. Fire doesn't get burned from fire.
I thought it's a ball of fire.
What?
It's a ball of fire.
A ball of fire. That's a fire. What's the pshat? That which is through and through, you don't see. You don't see it. Because it is through and through the inyan. What do you see? That which has a contrast. But this is through and through fire, so therefore you don't see it. And certainly someone else who is also fire cannot see it. What is the avodah of Yitzchak, and how is that what does it mean to us? You asked, how do you accomplish it? There are many ways to overcome obstacles. There are many ways to overcome obstacles, whether it is in behavior and what you have to do, or it is in learning. You need to learn something. You're learning a piece of Gemara. And you're having difficulty. So you try it to a certain extent. You ask somebody to help you and explain it to you. And then at a certain point, you say, okay, that's the extent that I can understand it. I still don't understand it, but this is the extent that I can understand it. Clearly, the reason that you cannot understand it fully, like the one who's explaining it to you, is because your mind is still distant. Your insight, your inner intellect, your inner thought process is away and is distant from this Gemara. But it is there. You're able to understand it. And if you dig deeper into yourself, you'll find it and you'll be able to reveal that seichel, that understanding. If we stubbornly stick to it and insist that I have to understand, I have to know this, I'm sure everyone had that experience sooner at one time or another, where something that he wasn't able to grasp, but if he set his mind to it and insisted that I have to get to know it, he gets to know it. Just by deciding that he wants to know it, that he doesn't want to give up. And what is different? What happens at the time when he makes that decision? What happens is that he brings out and he connects to a deeper self, to a deeper aspect of his own intellect. And he is able to dig to it and bring it out and understand that which he couldn't understand a moment ago. But Yitzchak had taught us and had shown that the fact that there is a dry land on top, without any life, without any water, you have to know that it is only a surface. It is not the real thing. The surface can be very thick. It could be a big layer of earth and rock. But it is only a surface. Because underneath the rock, there is a chayes. And when one breaks down and brings out that chayas, this is the real virut. This is where he really has an accomplishment. Because if somebody understands something and learns something, only because it was nicely presented and he was able to relate to the presentation and to the whole structure, tomorrow will be something else that he will not understand. When somebody, when you break through and you reach to a deeper sense of understanding, then that sense of understanding will now be applied to everything that you learn. You become what's called living waters. You live with it. The same thing is in terms of behavior, in terms of simple avodah. I always mention in terms of getting up in the morning, but this applies to everything that a person does. If one sets his mind and stubbornly pursues a mode of behavior and says, I'm going to mikveh every day. I'm sure everybody does already, so I'm not necessarily applying the right example. But whatever a person sets his mind to, however difficult it is, the very fact that he set his mind to it will bring out in him a strength that will enable him to do it. If he will every day need a little encouragement, like you mentioned the other day, the Rambam says that when you teach a child, at first you have to teach a child in his way. That means you have to bribe him. You give him a candy, you give him $1, you give him something so that he would learn and do the right thing. But ultimately, what you want from him is that he should not need to be rewarded. He should understand and appreciate what he is doing in itself, and its own merit. How does that happen? That happens when you finally let him go and you say, no, now you have to do it on your own. Now it's no longer based on reward, it's based on what you're going to get from me. You're going to get covered, you're going to get a mark. Now you are on your own. And when he reaches that point, when he becomes on his own, this is where he really reaches deep down into himself. And then he does not need any kind of encouragement. Then he doesn't need any kind of reward. Then every time that he learns something, and it's difficult, and he broke through this difficulty, and he gets to know it, he actually experiences a light that he never experienced before. He experiences an enlightenment, an insight, a bright light that he never experienced before. Because it comes from deep down into his own soul. And this is the avodah, this is gvura. Gvura means that you have to take the gashmius, you have to take that which conceals the ruchnius and break through it. Not just throw light on it from outside, but bring out the light that's inside. It says that L'osid Lovoi in the future time, when after Mashiach's coming, and when there is going to be full godly revelation, then it says, we will say to Yitzchok, Yatovim, Yitzchok, Eden will refer to Yitzchok only as their father, not to Avraham and not to Yankov. Only to Yitzchok, Yatovim. Why Yitzchok? Why not Avraham and Yankov? That is because in that time, in the future time, the time that of Mashiach and beyond, what's going to take place, what's going to happen is, it's not going to be a light brought into the world. The world itself will shine. The Gashmis itself will show how it is godliness. And when Gashmis itself shows how it's godliness, this is precisely the accomplishment of Yitzchak. This is Yitzchak. Yitzchak's inyan is to break down the Gashmi and to show how that is godliness. It is brought down, it says that in the future day, the body will be superior to the neshama. Did you ever hear that? The body will be superior to the neshama. The body that is now entirely, that is entirely the hell and the hesed, it's Gashmis and conceals all godliness. In the future day, the body is going to be superior, is going to be feeding and supporting the neshama. So these are all some wonderful things that we are going to soon see. But pertinent to ourselves and today is to understand that when we face an obstacle, this obstacle is meant to be broken through. Obstacle means that behind this obstacle is the flowing water. Behind this obstacle is the living water. And our objective and our function and we have koiches to break through this obstacle and get to that flowing water.
In the time of Moshiach is going to be obstacles, why we call Yitzchak Avinu in the time of Moshiach?
Because we accomplish that through the effort of Yitzchak.
Like how when take the part in the Ure, in the example when the person doesn't understand the Gemara. Say the person doesn't understand the Gemara, the person he reveal again in the Gemara. This comes from the Gemara. Is the time that he has in time from the side from the Gemara. This is the explanation. Because in Pashut look like he has the will for make again. In the beginning, this come from the side that he has. This time come from the Gebure, and after what happened, after his Chogma or the will or the Ratzon, how is the process? And the question, ¿cuál es el proceso que viene por la Gebure? ¿Me entendés? ¿Qué es lo que pasa? El deseo por Gebure primero. ¿Cómo?
No entiendo lo que está diciendo.
¿Cómo se puede saber? Él dijo que tiene la Gebura, tiene una parte, que viene por Gebure. El al querer otra vez.
It comes from the Gvura. Let me explain to you how it comes from the Gvura. The first thing, when one learns something and doesn't understand, the first thought that comes to the person is, if he is still not into learning properly, what is his first thought? It doesn't make sense. Right? It doesn't make sense. if he is a little bit more careful and wiser, he says to himself, no, it makes sense, probably, but I don't know enough to understand it. If he is even more wiser, if he's even more insightful, he realizes that this thing really makes sense. But to him it doesn't make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense to him is because his seichel is still not developed. It's still hidden inside him. When a person comes to realization that if he doesn't understand something, it's because he doesn't understand, that itself gives him a little break. And he says to himself, okay, I don't, so let me work hard and get to it. If I remove my own yeshus, if I remove my own gaiva, and I say, to the Gemara, please teach me, then I will get to it. The reason I don't get to it is because I think I understand everything. And if it doesn't make sense, then this is not in the realm of my understanding. But if I come to it and say, I don't understand, you teach me. You understand? That's a very completely different approach. That's the approach where he breaks his own yeshus and allows and comes out and tries to understand it. This is the approach of Gvul.
So, when somebody doesn't understand something in the Gemara, so we should go to the person who's teaching and ask him the question if we have no understanding.
Right. But what happens when the person is teaching you is trying to explain to you and it still doesn't make sense to you? Then you know that you have to work hard on your own. On yourself.
Where is the guru? Guru, this is strict to yourself. This is the.
Mm-hmm. The guru is where you understand that the reason you don't understand is because you're not sensitive enough. You're too coarse, too gashmi to understand it. You want to understand it in your own way, not the way the Gemara is teaching it to you.
Why it cannot come from the chesed? I really want to know this. So I study again.
In all understanding, in all seichel, there are generally speaking 2 levels and 3 levels. Let's talk about the 2 levels of understanding. There is when you understand something because somebody taught it to you, and you can repeat it. It makes sense to you because it was taught to you. And there is when you understand something because you understand it. It's as if feel it as if you were the one who first found this whole idea. It's yours. That's the real understanding. So if somebody listens at chesed, as much as you learn from someone else, it's not your seichel. You can always repeat it, but you're repeating someone else's seichel. It makes sense to you, but it's not something that you find it in yourself and you see this is my own reality. If nobody told me, I would have come up with this myself. I don't have that. When you learn in this derech of Yitzchak, then you break through and you get, and the seichel becomes yours. It flows from your own seichel, from your own mind. And even if it were not told, you would also be able to see it. This is the pshat that there is, in the Gashmis itself there is light. There is ruchnis. Just one second. Because I don't want to miss the opportunity to finish the scene. In this world, we are always faced with nisyonos, always faced with what we call tests, obstacles. When we deal with these obstacles as I have to go through, I have to do the right thing because my teacher told me, my friends told me, whatever it is, anything that comes from outside, this is the way you're supposed to do. Everybody does it this way. There's going to be a point where you will not be able to do it. There's going to be a point where you're going to compromise. It's going to be a point where, nobody's going to know the difference. When do you have a path in life where you can be whatever you are, wherever the Hashem brings you, and you are still the same, and you still guide yourself in the same way, it is when it comes from yourself. So to start off, you have to learn from others, you have to learn from your friends, you have to learn from your teachers, and so forth. But ultimately, everything, and ultimately it has to be touching you yourself. It has to be your own commitment. It has to be your own conviction, so that no matter what the circumstances are, the world doesn't change. Hashem doesn't change. Even though it's completely different. Here in Yeshiva, it's one thing. In Yeshiva, it's easy to daven and to learn and to mitzvahs and to be mahader in everything. But outside, it's a different environment. If it's a different environment, then you are a different person. So we have to know that the reality of Torah mitzvahs is real, coming straight from me, myself. So then, no matter what the circumstances are, I'm the same person. I'll give you an example from our shluchim, the Ingelai, the shluchim, thousands of shluchim. And they're all simple people. They're not all geniuses, but they're all true and dedicated through and through. So you take a family, you send them away, they go away to Laos. Lately there was Laos, South Korea. They announced, completely distant away from everything. And they need milk. And there's no Chol of Yisrael. You can't go and buy I have a milk in the store. There isn't. Or anything else. So what do you do? If this became your own thing, if Yiddishkeit became your own thing, then you'll find ways to do it. And if not, say, under these circumstances, it's not the worst thing. you begin to compromise because you don't have the strength to stand up to these difficulties. A child, to give you an example, a child goes to school and gets all kinds of praises, and his tati and mommy are very proud of him. And then comes something, a very difficult task that he has to study. And he lays out, and he doesn't have the spirit to do it. So he thinks to himself, okay, so my tati will not be proud of me. So big deal. I'll better play ball instead. It's possible. But if this became his own thing, that he personally wants to know it, then he's not going to look for excuses. The same as true by a child is true by an adult. And when is it true by an adult? Only when it becomes his own thing, and that is when he broke through all the barriers in his own mind, and he found the spark in his own heart. This is what Yitzchak showed. He showed that even if you have dry land, if you dig deep down, there is fresh water on it. So, Rebbe will help from all of us that we should be in contact and connect with our own insight, our own fresh water. Because, as I was saying before, the challenges that we face in life are such that it is imperative. Imperative means it's a must that one has a personal commitment to going through life properly. The circumstance, just because it looks good, it's not sufficient. You have to have a completely personal commitment to make it work. Then it works. And you're ready to give up and sacrifice anything that's needed in order to accomplish it. That's when it works. I'll tell you a little brief story of a Yid a story that I heard from him. It's going back many years ago. They see this now in Gan Eden already. He was a Rov, and he was living in a certain town. There was no yeshiva, no school over there. The school was about an hour away from where they are, an hour or two, I don't remember exactly, quite a distance away. So, and he was a busy man. And the only way to give his children education, the proper education, was to drive them in the morning to the school, come back, which is in itself 2 hours or more than that, and it was a very long time. And then in the afternoon go and pick him up on a daily basis. It's extremely, extremely exhausting to do that. And there were other people in the community, and he was urging them, let's make some kind of and it didn't happen. So he had to do it himself. Then he wanted to make some kind of a carpool, people should go together, should share, nothing. So he went on his own. He went on his own, and he would pick up other children, bring them to school, bring him back. He says it came to a point where he was so exhausted, he was falling off his feet. One time, he drove the children to that school. When he got there, he fainted. He fainted. He was so out of conscious. And then, after that, he said to himself, I'm sure now things are going to change. I broke it through. And it happened like this. And after that, things began to improve. First they made a carpool, and then made a school locally, but he broke through it. But he had to go to that end, to that point, where he actually just couldn't do it anymore. And then he broke through. If he had less than that kind of a commitment, as a matter of fact, I also remember a family that I knew when I was in Philadelphia. There was a young family, and the father was a sheikhet, was a very fine Arid, and his children were going to public school. So I said, how can your children go to public? Where else should they go? So if there's no other place to go, you send them to New York. Or you yourself move to New York. I can't do it, how can I do it? Anyway, he went back and forth, and he lost his children. He lost them. He was a Frumaid, and he was tearing his hair out from the fact that his children are not getting a Jewish education, a proper education. But he didn't have that strength to go and do what he needed to be done. This is why it's necessary to understand. We have to remember the digging of wells, how you dig a well. And this is how we have to dig in our own heart and our own soul. To have much hatzlacha, each one.
There's nothing.